Hello, everyone, and welcome to another virtual Eclipse Community Meetup. My name is Samantha, and joining us today we have Tom Henriksen. He will discuss how to set yourself apart as a developer and learn the skills of influence and collaboration. Tom Henriksen is a problem-solving technology professional. He has worked on various roles in technology for over 20 years. Tom has learned how to solve challenging issues in technology and lead technical teams. He can help you develop these skills too. If you have any questions for Tom as we move throughout today's presentation, feel free to ask them in our chat or use the Ask a Question tab. Without any further delay, Tom, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction. Well, hello, everyone. I just want to say hello to all you. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it. I know everyone's got a busy day, lots of things going on. But to start off, let's put in the chat where we're joining from. I'm going to put where I'm joining from. So I'm in Newtown, Pennsylvania. That's near Philly. If you can share where you're at, we have some shares in Orlando, Florida. Welcome, share. John from Long Island. Okay, not too far away from me. So I was just up in New York this last weekend. Hamburg, Germany. Conrad, hello. Hello, hello, hello. So good to have you guys joining us. So we are going to have a presentation here called Humans Are Hard, Code is Easy. So this is from my background as a developer. As you heard, I've been a developer for a few years. I have some gray hairs to show, I guess I should say. So we're going to go through this presentation, and just to get to know you guys better. First off, though, one quick question. I want to ask you guys, where have you struggled with as a developer? So I'm going to put in a few things that I've struggled with. And you're going to hear more about that during the presentation. But share some things. Maybe it's a technology issue. Maybe it's, as you can tell by the title of this presentation, a human issue. But we'll get into that. So just if you could share where you've struggled with being a developer. So maybe you're really struggling with a certain API or learning a certain language, or maybe it's struggling with some of the people you've worked with in the past. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a second, but feel free to share where you've struggled in the chat. And then, like she had mentioned before, I'm going to go into a presentation here. I'm going to do about 15 minutes or so. During that time, feel free, if you have a question or something that comes up, to share it in the chat. You can do it. I know there's an Ask a Question feature. We'll be monitoring that. I'll be stopping at various points today and I know people are joining here as we kind of come in. I know where I work, and I've worked before. A lot of times the meetings don't end and start on time, but no worries for you guys. Today, we're going to make sure we're done and honor your time commitments, so you don't have to worry about that. But we'll get jumping in here in a few seconds. So John says, I'm a new developer transitioning from accounting background, so struggling with a bit with it all. So, okay, very good, John. That is a great thing to hear about people going through career transition. So just another part of that, we're going to hear a little bit about mine in a second here. So as you'll see in a minute, I haven't always been a developer, and have a few stories to tell about it. So John, I think you're going to learn some things, I think, as we get into it. But as I mentioned before, if you guys have any questions, feel free to share them in the chat or use the Ask Question feature, and we'll go through those in a little bit. So just so you know, if you didn't hear before. So we're going to go through a little presentation. I'm going to stop. I have some questions for you. Collaborating. Yeah, that can be tough, can't it? Collaboration is a key thing we're going to talk about. But like I mentioned, so we're going to do a little bit of presentation. I'm going to stop. I'm going to ask you guys for questions, and then I have a few questions for you. So we'll go through that just to kind of build in that interaction. I don't want to talk the whole time. And so we'll have a little discussion via the chat, of course, through our tools today. But I really appreciate you joining us. We're about 4 or 5 minutes in. So I think I'm going to jump into this presentation, the first part, like I mentioned. So we're going to do about a first half questions for that, and then second half questions for that. And then we'll obviously be wrapped up before the top of the hour, so you guys can get on with your day. But I really appreciate you all joining us. So this is the first part of Humans Are Hard, Code is Easy. And just if you're looking for slides, there are no slides, just so you know. So this is a presentation that I've been working on for a while and shared quite a bit. So humans are hard, code is easy. Here's a string of thoughts that ran across my mind early in my programming career. Why can't people just leave me alone and I can do my work? I can figure this out myself. I don't need others' help or any input to turn this thing around. Why don't people understand me? I think it must be they're just dumb. They don't recognize genius when they see it. Perhaps you've been there too, a frustrated developer who feels like they know enough. However, the success you thought you'd have is out of reach. You see others who make better strides, but why? Is it a skills gap? I want to share with you how I learned about my skills gap. Java, check. Linux, check. SQL, check. Humans, what? Humans are hard. Code is easy. So I focused on the technology. One of my first mentors was a database administrator named Doyle. He really knew his stuff, but didn't say much. That can make learning challenging. One thing Doyle would do is fix the problem for me. Doyle would fix it so quickly and then leave. What did you do? He was already gone. Working with Doyle gave me some insight. Technical people hate explaining basic stuff. Ask them a simple question and they will flip the bozo bit on you. What is the bozo bit, you say? A few years after working with Doyle, I got to work with a software architect named Corey. He had many interesting observations. One thing Corey would do if you asked him a stupid question, you know, the kind that you could have figured out yourself by doing some basic research on your own, he wouldn't answer your question or work with you. That, my friends, is the bozo bit. Bozo, of course, refers to Bozo the clown, the bit in reference to computer bit or binary storage. Corey was pretty extreme, but many developers can be that way. To gain respect from those developers, we need to know the technology. Humans are hard, code is easy. So I focused on the technology. I learned new coding styles. I tried to keep my head down, avoid getting the bozo bit flipped on me. A few years later, I transitioned into a new job, technical lead. One year during my annual evaluation, my leader said to me, "Tom, we think you have solid credentials. Coding skills got you the job, but we need you to develop other skills." My leader shared with me where I was failing. Delegation. He shared how I wasn't delegating work to my teammates. Case in point, there was an upgrade that needed to be done. I did the work in 10 minutes or so. To explain that to a few teammates would have taken twice that amount of time or more. Another trap I fell into with delegation is a belief in our value. We can convince ourselves that we are worth more when others can't do the same work as us. I remember working with Jamie the first time. I wasn't quite sure he understood what we were doing. He was always done quickly. Then I finally asked him. Here he had created a script to deploy changes and update dependencies. I was doing this all manually. I was worried about delegation, and the people I worked with had better ideas. Perhaps I didn't know everything I thought I did. A few years later, I got to work with a leader named John. We knew each other through a mutual friend. I had begun to coach individuals and teams. John wanted an outside resource, help him change his team's mindset. He shared how most IT people work with others in a transactional fashion. We get the requirements and we solve the issue. John said, "Tom, my team is like bank tellers. They get asked to fix something and they do, just like a teller gets a check and deposits the check. I want my team to be more like a financial planner. A financial planner builds relationships. Then they can anticipate needs." So you're saying, John, you want your team to have better relationships with their customers? John said, "Tom, if they have better relationships, they will develop empathy and understanding." Relationships, understanding, and empathy? Huh? That won't work. That's what I thought at the time, but I was wrong. John knew his team wasn't as understanding and as empathetic as he'd hoped they'd be. He began requiring them to talk to the community directors when they travel. These conversations helped them empathize Instead of just fixing the problem, they fostered relationships too. Each little change John made helped his team understand the community directors had many things on their plate. These conversations also worked the other way too. The community directors began to give John's team space. If something went wrong, they trusted them to resolve it. John proved me wrong. He overcame his deficit by being curious and empathetic. He was able to change the way his team interacted with the organization. So much so that he has since been given additional responsibilities. From bank tellers to financial planners, he remade the image of his IT team. This brings me to my main idea. Coding skills got you the job. Influence will get you the career. Coding skills got you the job. Influence will get you the career. What do I mean? Developers are focusing on technology skills only. If we truly want to set ourselves apart, we need to know how to influence and collaborate with teams. Gone are the days when we can just send in requirements with pizza and out pops code. Organizations are looking for more from their developers. The problem, my problem, was I was terrible at relationships. I had confirmation. I had proof. Although I didn't start out as a developer, my first job in my career was quite different. I remember it like it was yesterday. My first job out of school. I started at Wallace. What is Wallace, you say? We sold business forms and office supplies in Des Moines, Iowa, kind of like Dunder Mifflin. Armed with a business management degree and no real idea, I had 3 job options when I graduated from college. I could sell insurance, or I could sell life insurance, or I could sell business forms. So I did what any sane person would do. I sold business forms. Who wants to call on their friend's parents for insurance anyways? Did I mention that Des Moines is the insurance capital of the world? Back to my first day at Wallace. Can you believe I had to make a few cold calls before lunch? Let me remind you, in college, the only time I called my friends was when we were having a kegger. Getting people to buy business forms is a bit more difficult than getting college students to drink beer. Now, I really didn't want to make those calls, but lunch was getting close. I was given 3 prospects from another sales representative to call on. Hello, is Mike Huff available? Sure. Can you let him know Tom Henriksen called? Yeah. I'm from Wallace. Click. Whew. Hello, this is Tom Henriksen, your new Wallace representative. Oh, sorry, Mr. Hagna. I apologize if our label's off your product. Click. Whoa. I guess we got disconnected there. Okay, just one more and we can go to lunch. What? Do we call on gentlemen's clubs? My coworkers all die laughing. Turns out this is their way of initiating new sales representatives. My sales career went down in flames pretty quickly. Similar to Tommy Boy, my sales techniques were not appreciated. Soon after my first day in sales, I started to realize something. This wasn't going anywhere. A friend from high school shared with me an opportunity in technology, so I began to pursue a different path and get a new degree. I left my job in sales and began work as a developer. Now, as you can imagine, working as a developer is quite a bit different than working in sales. The sales office I worked in was always full of people talking. They would be talking on the phones to customers or talking to each other. The developers I worked with, well, they were a quiet bunch on the whole. Friday afternoon in the sales office, the newest rep had to go get beer for everyone. Friday afternoon with the developers was quiet, just like the rest of the week. Now, perhaps it's starting to sound like I didn't want to make this change, but that was not the case. I slowly began to realize I was more Spock than Jimmy Fallon. The quiet contemplative work of a developer suited me more. As my technology career began, I started to work with lots of old tools and technologies at the time. I wanted to move into something more current. I heard a lot of buzz around the Java language. So in my free time and nights and weekends, I would read and work through tutorials online. All this work paid off a few months later when a company leader came to me and said, "Tom, would you be able to help Dave with a new application?" Turned out they needed someone who could write an application using Java. I, of course, agreed. Like Luke beginning to use the Force, I was starting with some basics. As my Java skills began to improve from experience, I learned a few other things too. I began to work with someone who seemed quite sharp from a technical perspective. But Eric wasn't easy to get along with. He would yell at people he worked with. You might say he was a complete jerk sometimes. The managers and team allowed this to happen in a large part because he was productive. I can still see it now when I close my eyes. Now, Eric was a smoker and he was trying to quit, which made him even more testy. Eric and Sri were working together on some files when I came walking down a row of cubes, and Eric was in Sri's cube, yelling. You know how people get mad and their veins look like they're going to pop out of their head? Eric's veins were about ready to explode. Then he ran out the door. I guess he needed a smoke. I asked Sri if he was okay. He said he was okay, then looked at me and said, "But no one should have to put up with him." Sri couldn't have been more correct. Eric was a tyrant who ran around like Darth Vader, intimidating people. We all put up with his terrible treatment just because he was able to code a lot. Even though developers act like Spock, doesn't mean we don't have feelings too. I would like to tell you that Eric was let go and the team was able to move on. The company did nothing to him. His behavior was left unhandled. Eric wasn't a team player. He was out for himself. If you work with a coding hero like Eric, they can take all the tough work and make it easier for others. But this doesn't really help the growth of the group. It can stunt the overall growth of the team. If you work with a coding hero like Eric and they take vacation, things can fall apart. Let me share a story about a leader who dealt with a similar issue. Now, Ben was a leader that I worked with, and he had a coding hero. We'll call him Dave. Dave would code solutions that were more complex than others could understand. Dave was coming up on a milestone birthday. To celebrate, he was going to bike across multiple states with all his gear. So he took off 3 weeks. Now, Ben knew this was going to be an issue. So he met with the team and they discussed the challenges. The team decided to begin to have knowledge transfer sessions with Dave. Ben helped foster this collaboration. This enabled the team to become more resilient and slowly chip away at that knowledge gap. At my next stop, I began to master my skills in Java. I was responsible for an application that required me to learn some new technologies. Now, as many of you know, software development can be a bit like trending song sales on iTunes. One day something's hot, the next day it's out of date. During this time in my career, many open source tools became popular. Mastery for Luke Skywalker came after a battle with Darth Vader. Programming is a lot like writing. As the author Stephen Pressfield says, the amateur tweets, the pro works. Professional programmers have to show up every day and slay small demons. The first skill I needed to master as a developer was debugging. Of course, today the tools are much more mature. One of the first applications I had to debug didn't have any such tools. I was armed with print statements in a log file. Quite primitive by today's standards. All right, here, let's see. Where is that value being set? All right, let's add a print statement here. Recompile. Oh, compile error. I forgot the semicolon. All right, let's add the semicolon. Run the report. Table log. Oh my goodness, the database isn't set up right. Okay, let me update that table. Updated, run the report, table log. Now that looks better. Of course, debugging is so much easier today, but we still need to use the old bean. As Steve McConnell points out in his book, Code Complete, We need to learn the types of mistakes we make. Early in my Java career, I made the same mistake time and again. I would forget to initialize my variables. I could still hear my coworker Ken laughing at me when he would look at my code and point out my obvious error. We need to take a step back and reflect on how we are doing. How could I improve my coding, debugging, and testing? Software developers like to impress each other. I had to use the singleton pattern to fix that. Don't worry, most developers don't know what that means either. There are many esoteric topics we can talk about for hours. In Essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less, Greg McKeown shares how important editing is to journalism. Now, the journalists have still bring the stories and write up the ideas, but the editor has the important job. They review the piece and rework it. Over my years as a developer, I've mentored many other developers. One in particular, though, sticks out. He began reading about code basics. This made him add unnecessary code from time to time. I remember when he was debugging an error, we were debugging an error he was getting together when I asked him, why is this loop here? When he looked at me unsure and said, I don't know. I thought it would help. He thought it would help. Once we removed his unnecessary loop, we resolved his error. Adding code is easy. Knowing what to keep is hard. Now, it's not that I'm saying computer science basics are not important. We need to master these too. However, if we put our sole focus on them, though, our careers will falter. I spoke before about Eric. He had mastered computer science. His teammates, though, couldn't stand him. We need to be good at our work and get along with our teammates. If we do just one of these, we aren't doing our job. All right, that is the first portion of Humans Are Hard, Code is Easy. So I want to pause here. If anyone has any questions, feel free to, you can share them in the chat. And I know there's the Ask a Question feature. So feel free to use either one of those. So I put a question there for people in the chat. So as you heard about in the initial part of this presentation, the first portion, we talked about relationships. So I learned a lot from a VP. His name was John. You heard him in the story, talked a little bit about relationship management. So I put the question in the chat. Feel free to share what you do to foster professional relationships. So what are some things you're doing? Maybe it's joining a user group or networking with some people at work, but what are some of the things you guys do to help foster relationships, professional relationships? Because as you heard there, you could hear it in the story there. I struggled with that. And that was something that I didn't realize, to be honest, when I started, and I see, John had mentioned earlier that John's transitioning to a developer. So when I first started as a developer, you heard where I came from before as a salesperson, but didn't realize how important those relationships were. And you're going to hear more later in the story about the importance of those relationships, but feel free to, share what you guys do to help foster your professional relationships. So if you have any questions too, feel free to share those. And I'm going to post one other question here too for you guys. Feel free to answer those. So Conrad says, work on open source projects. Yeah, that's a good idea to get involved. Very good. So John is saying current profession, especially working from home environment. Yeah, FaceTime with other video is really important. Yeah, that's true, John. That's one of the things I've heard a lot of people talk about, how important that is to get that face time, try to see other people, look for different ways to connect. Yeah, working on an open source project. Yeah, that's a really good way to find out who's to learn a lot and kind of grow your career, grow your connection, especially outside of maybe your organization. So yeah, there too. So we talked about career transition. So I know, John, you've already shared that you are coming from an accounting background and moving into a developer and kind of struggling with that a bit. That's one thing. I think it's important to think about those things, kind of where you struggle, but to look at some things where they're similar. But I think maybe some of you others have also gone through maybe a career transition. Maybe you've always been a developer, so it's all over the map. I know, as I given this presentation numerous times to different groups, developers, quality assurance groups, business analysts, project managers. I find it interesting the career transitions that people, a lot of people like you're going through, John, come from accounting to development or other similar career paths. So, but yeah, there's lots of interesting career transitions, and I think it's important to think about, maybe, for instance, for you, John, think about what are some of the things that are similar. So some of those, as they call those, transferable skills that you can use, because I think there's a lot of those, and we're going to touch on quite a bit of those in this presentation. But there's probably a few that you can probably think about, John, that where I'm guessing, for instance, you probably have good attention to detail doing accounting. That's something I think that can be helpful as a software developer. But so yeah, work on open source projects. Those are good ways to build up that those professional relationships. Yeah, working in a professional environment. Yeah, that's a good one that I know sometimes I've worked with some. I did a work with a graduate program once at a university, and that's one of the things. Kind of that transition to a professional environment can be difficult for some people as you come out of college, because it's there's some differences. We don't, for instance, have like a spring break or semester breaks or summer breaks and things like that, and to just the way you act and stuff in a professional environment can be something to learn. So we have to learn those, but that's a good point, John. All right. Excellent. Well, unless anybody has any other questions, like I said, feel free to share those in the chat. We can go into the second half. So as I go through this, make sure, like I said before, if you have questions, feel free to share them in the chat, or you can go back if you do come through and think of something for one of those questions that I posed, around how to foster professional relationships or how career transitions. Feel free to share those as we go along. All right, we'll go into the second half of Humans Are Hard, Code is Easy. As I learned more about soft skills, my career progressed. First as a developer, then into a senior developer role. Next, I moved into a technical lead. And finally, I became a manager of software development. At that point, I was feeling really good about my career progression. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Friday morning in May. I took my kids to school and came into the office at my normal time, a little before 8 a.m. Oddly enough, my boss was in. He usually came in at 9 or after. Anyways, I sat down and unpacked my things. Then Scott, my boss, came to my desk and said, "Tom, can I talk with you?" I said, "Sure." And I followed him to his office. Although when he came to his office, he took a right instead. That's strange, as I thought, as I followed Scott down the hallway. Then he took a left into Sandy's office. Who is Sandy, you ask? Well, she was the director of human resources. We sat down, and then Scott looked at me and said, "Tom, this is your last day here." If you've ever had that said to you at work or in a relationship, you know what it feels like. The rest was strange as I felt the calm come over me. I knew something was going to happen. Although as I looked across the table, I could tell Scott and Sandy felt terrible. They discussed the next steps. I packed my things and left. Getting fired gives us a good chance to reflect. What did we do wrong? How could this have been avoided? As I look back, I realized one lesson first. What led to this was a lack of clarity. The team I led didn't execute accordingly. And processing this, though, took time as we can get frustrated and want to blame others. However, we need to own our mistakes. That helped me move forward. The second lesson I learned was the importance of relationship management. As John taught us earlier, we need to continually foster our connections. I began to reach out to my network, and the opportunities were plentiful. So even in something as trying as getting fired can be a moment for learning if we take the time to unpack the wisdom. Mastering basic skills requires guidance. Early in my software career, I worked with a developer named Wei. He instilled in me a systemic approach that I still use today. Software development is essentially problem solving. But Wei began to notice oftentimes I was trying to solve 5 things at once. Wei's guidance was brought clear to me a few years later when I attended a seminar. At Michael Hyatt's Best Year Ever conference, he discussed goal setting. Michael said, detailed plans are great if you're building a nuclear submarine. For everything else, just focus on the next step. Wei and Michael agreed on this point. Don't overthink it. In Proverbs, it is said, in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. Luke's journey first brought him to Obi-Wan Kenobi, where he learned some basics, similar to what I learned from Wei. He kept learning, and so have I. Reflection doesn't come easy for me. I want to move on to the next thing. In David Marquis' book, Leadership is Language, he details the red work, the doing, and the blue work, the thinking. In the book, David discusses how important they are, both aspects of making progress. He walks us through the Industrial Revolution, where the workers did the red work and the managers did the blue work. Today, us knowledge workers must do both. The simple pause gives us a chance to step back and reflect. How can I or we do this better? Think, apply, reflect. I know what you're starting to think. Tom, I'm a software developer. I don't need no stinking soft skills. Of course, if you don't want your career to get better, keep on keeping on. My career path has changed dramatically as I've learned the importance of communication, relationships, and influence. Let's explore the 3 core soft skills. These will set the stage for a career transformation. So remember, coding skills got you the job, influence will get you the career. Number 1, communication. Listen to what is being said. Ask good questions and seek clarity. Developers who do this write better code. They don't assume they know the answer. In the book, The Pragmatic Programmer, Andy Hunt and Dave Thomas talk about the importance of digging for requirements. Look between the lines. Part of communication is knowing your message. I've opened my mouth too many times in my career and just started talking. Know what you want to say and say it. Number 2, influence. In How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie describes how we need to talk in terms of the other person's interest. Now, I once tried to convince a corporate vice president we should use a new technology. He wasn't interested at all. However, the next time I spoke to him, I aligned a technical change with a corporate objective. The outcome of that conversation was quite different. Number three of the three core soft skills is leading change. When we want to lead a change, we need to share the vision. A few years ago, I was fortunate to work with a sharp product owner named Nikia. We began working together on an application for customer service representatives. As we began, the team really struggled with understanding her vision. That's when Nikia realized we needed a field trip. She had the entire team spend a day with those customer service representatives. We got to see their struggles. The team came back energized and with a better understanding. Nikia was able to lead a change by connecting and sharing the vision with the team. These three core soft skills can change your career direction. Let me share a story how I use them myself. In my first role as a manager, I tried to get to know the team. This can help build trust and influence with them. Perhaps you're starting to think, this won't work for me. Let me tell you about AJ. His path was a rocky one. AJ was a strong developer, but he rarely talked. He worked in a slow, methodical fashion and always kept his emotions in check. Over time, his teammates became irritated with his style. I tried to get to know him. For instance, we connected on a few things. AJ traveled to Germany to pick up his new BMW. He was quite excited about that. Still, his unwillingness to communicate with others, and especially the product owner, was wearing thin. That's when my manager came to me and said, Tom, it is time for AJ to decide if he wants to be part of the team. My manager asked me to put AJ on a PIP, or performance improvement plan. I had 60 days to help him improve, or else. Despite his strong coding skills, his career was on a downward trajectory. When I met with AJ and explained the situation, he began yelling at me and said, I'm the best developer you got, and stormed right out of the meeting. The first 2 weeks after this incident were really shaky. AJ wouldn't talk to me or anyone. I kept checking in on him daily. I knew he was an introvert. He needed his space and time. Eventually, AJ and I sat down and discussed the PIP and how it made him feel. That's when I got AJ to agree to try some experiments. We met as a team and created some working agreements. These clarified everyone's role. Also, it stated how we would work together. I got the product owner to give AJ one final shot. In the end, we were able to give AJ the space he needed. Through coaching him and his teammates, we were able to work through it. AJ was able to develop the soft skills he needed to change his career direction. I was able to communicate and influence the team using the three core soft skills. I learned how to help AJ, myself, and others. You can do this too. Coding is important, but it's not enough. We can keep our head down and avoid getting the bozo bit flipped on us, but that won't lead us where we want to go. Communication matters. Relationships matter. Empathy and understanding matter. Practicing these soft skills will give you more influence, which leads to more success. Better collaboration with your coworkers, people seeking out your opinion as an expert, managers choosing you for the most exciting projects. Practicing soft skills is how you code the future of your dreams. All right. I'm going to pause here and see if anyone has any questions. Feel free to share them in the chat. All right. I have a couple questions for you guys before we wrap things up here. First step, I'm going to post this one here. Here's a question here. I got another question for you. So you guys heard in the first part, as we came back from the break, I had a career misstep, you might say. So what career missteps have you guys maybe learned from? And of course, I hope you haven't had the same experience as me, but as I give this talk, a lot of times, sometimes people have, but maybe maybe you said the wrong thing to the wrong person, or opened your mouth, or, there's a lot of things that we can do that fall short of being let go. But feel free to share if you've had some career missteps. Feel free to share those in the chat or answer that question. Because I think a lot of times as we can reflect. So you heard as I was let go, that the simple fact that I was able to take some time and kind of reflect on that was really helpful for me. I learned a lot of lessons, as I mentioned there. What my main issue there was, I wasn't asking the right questions. I wasn't clear on objectives. And that's something I try to, as my role as a developer, my role is, I've been in other roles as well, like a Scrum Master and a manager too. But always as a developer, I try to make sure I'm solving the right problem, and that two were aligned on that, because that's one of the things I think I've struggled with at various times as a developer, is making sure that we're aligned on communication. Because I think sometimes we go in, try to solve a problem, or maybe you've been guilty of this. I've done this a lot in my career. You learn a new technology, and boy, you want to apply that new technology to everything you do. And that's one of the things where you have a tool and you're trying to look for a problem to solve. And that's one of the things that I've been guilty of in my career. And I know I've worked with other people that have had that same experience, where they, you see, like, you might come to an event, like an Eclipse Foundation event, and learn some new tool they have, and you want to apply that. But if you don't understand the problem, sometimes you misapply technology, and it can get you in trouble. It's gotten me in trouble. So feel free to share those in the chat. And then I have one other question I'm going to post in here too. So as you guys heard, post that in there. So one of the things that I've had, I think is important, is that communication and bringing alignment for communication. So some of the challenges, making sure communication's aligned. And then two, if there's certain domains, I know this is a group of developers, but a lot of times you might have seen similar things where, for instance, if you're struggling with maybe it's a product owner or a business analyst might be having issues with aligning that. So Conrad shares here, tell us about your achievements, even if you think they are not so important. Yeah, that's good. Keep your name in your boss's head. That's right. Yeah, that's true. So Conrad, you bring up an interesting point. I think that a lot of times I've seen this, and I've done this myself, as a developer. Sometimes we think the act of doing the work is all we need to do. But as you point out here, Conrad, one of the things that I think a lot of times I've struggled with, and a lot of technical people will struggle with, is that we need to do the work, but we also need to report out the work is complete, so people know. For instance, like, and maybe you guys work a lot with Jira, or maybe, kind of in our remote work, or you have your daily chats. Make sure that, people know, what did you work on? How did you complete it? Maybe because I think you bring up a really good point there, Conrad, that sometimes we think, oh, I pushed this to get, it's good. My work is done. But you need to make sure everybody knows that. For instance, like, developers a lot of times will live in GitHub, but there are other people you might be working with that don't, and you need to let them know. So for instance, like that, make sure, okay, yeah, somebody needs to know about, there's a pull request or something that's not a technical person, that we need to communicate those things out. But that's a good point, Conrad. Thanks for sharing that. So yeah, as you guys think about this, this is important aspects of, communication, relationships, and influence are kind of those core things that I talked about. So I think that's where a lot of times we focus on the technology skills. Done that myself. I could, read you a list of certification tests that I've taken. Some I've passed, some I haven't, but, thinking that will help my career. But I think we have to think about how to create that, kind of balance approach, so that we we can, communicate and influence with the teammates, but also to be technically savvy and be able to complete the work that we need to be done. So, but other than that, if you guys don't have any other questions, I can turn it back over and we can close this out. So, but I just want to thank everyone's time for this, and been great to be part of it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Tom, for that excellent presentation today.
Thank you.
Just a reminder, of course, as he mentioned, feel free to ask any questions in the chat or use the question tab. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to do that while I wrap everything up. So if you are interested in yourself to be booking a virtual Eclipse Community Meetup, we're looking to host more sessions throughout 2022. Feel free to fill out the form, which I will be linking in the chat in just a moment. And John, there's a question with regards to any of your contact information so that people can reach out to you after. Is there an option for that?
Yeah, let me post in the chat just Eclipse, or excuse me, my LinkedIn. So if people want to connect with me there, that's probably the easiest way. So, and if there's other places where you think this would be a good presentation, feel free to let me know or share this with others. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. Well, if there are no other questions, I'd like to again thank Tom for that fantastic presentation. And thanks to you all for attending. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Cheers, everyone. Have a good one.